Why are games so bad at representing other cultures? Video game designers have learned how to make even the most foreign worlds feel grounded. No matter how many monsters or how much magic there is in a virtual world, players can quickly assimilate foreign environmental details and their characters' traits. Yet, a huge problem remains in the medium's treatment of actual, in real life, foreign locations, otherwise known as cultural appropriation. Cultural appropriation happens when one usually dominant group or culture, like Caucasians or Americans, exploit or borrow elements of another, usually oppressed culture, without a lot of consideration or input. This cultural insensitivity is an issue for a lot of games set on foreign soil, in particular war games. In 2013, Call of Duty set part of its campaign and multiplayer map in Karachi, Pakistan. Despite all the hours Sledgehammer Games spent perfecting every piece of rubble or destroyed bus, they missed one key detail. Pakistan's two official languages are Urdu and English, yet every street sign and every piece of dialogue that they recorded for the Karachi map was in Arabic. And that wasn't even an isolated incident. Medal of Honor Warfighter did the exact same thing. And the worst part, often games don't even get Arabic right either. In many cases, Splinter Cell Conviction's Arabic was just a bunch of squiggly lines. Embarrassing as they may be, language mix-ups are the least of our problems. Native Americans are one of the most stereotyped cultures in all of games.
I sense great change on the wind.
Everyone knows Custer's revenge is obviously awful, but fewer people think there's a problem when games perpetuate the idea of a single pan-Indian identity, complete with feathers and shaman superpowers. Just look at Chief Thunder from Killer Instinct, Nightwolf from Mortal Kombat, and T-Hawk from Street Fighter. And when hundreds of unique Native American tribes aren't getting generalized into one pseudo-identity, they're the random scapegoat for whatever mystical crap is happening in a game. I'm looking at you, Beyond Two Souls.
Gotta see what happened.
Smite, the fighting game that pins gods and goddesses against each other, includes a swath of different cultural figures, which is totally great. Here's the thing though, today relatively few people actually worship the god Zeus, but over 1 billion people still worship the Hindu goddess Kali, so 1 billion people have the right to get really offended when their sacred religious figure gets turned into a boobified fighting game character. Just for a little bit of context, can you imagine if we did that with, say, the Virgin Mary? Of course, this isn't an issue exclusive to games. In fact, Adam Sandler was recently accused of cultural appropriation by Native American extras on the set of his upcoming comedy, Ridiculous Six, offending people this fall.
My Native women were disrespected, and I walked off the set.
Appropriating African American culture seems to have been synonymous with being hip for pop stars like Iggy Azalea and Taylor Swift. Not a new thing, but appropriation is fundamentally different when it comes to video games because game worlds are often designed to be conquered by players. We start off as foreigners, but are quickly on our way to become masters of that virtual space. If you want to hear more about that, be sure to check out our episode on the Power Fantasy. However, the good news is, for as bad as some of these games can be, and yes, they are very bad, there are lots of great examples of games being amazing cultural explorations. The recently released Never Alone, for example, captures the stories of the Inupiat, a native Alaskan tribe. Working closely with the elders of that group, the game makers actually managed to preserve their culture and spread it to a global gaming audience. And of course, there's also Assassin's Creed 3, which, for all of its other faults, went to painstaking lengths to capture the historic Mohawk language and culture, and those opening tutorial sequences with the tribe were some of the best in the whole series. And keep in mind that cultural differences are not the same as cultural appropriation. You don't have to be from a certain culture to use it in your game, as long as you take your distance from it into consideration. The Scottish creators of GTA, for example, took their natural distance from American culture as an opportunity to satirize it. No New Yorker could have captured the city like GTA 4 did. It's a better game because of cultural differences, not in spite of it. Think of the big picture here. Embracing cultures outside of your own can only add to our overall experience. Because play is one of those activities that transcends all our differences, video games are primed for being a particularly universal type of entertainment. The Witcher 3, for example, is a distinctly Polish game with Polish creators who take a deep dive into their culture's ancient and fascinating lore. Yet The Witcher 3 can be enjoyed by anyone, whether it's an audience in Europe, America, Asia, South America, wherever. And Naveed Kansari, an Iranian designer for Grand Theft Auto, discovered in his home country teenagers weren't excited about his games for the guns or the missions. Since most American music is banned in their country, Iranian players were excited to just cruise around in a hot ride and listen to the radio. A true American experience, am I right? Games are amazing at communicating a sense of place. Imagine what they could do if creators put the same level of detail into recreating foreign countries and cultures as they do in creating fantastical ones. Let's Players could become like the Anthony Bourdains of virtual worlds.
How do you play this game?
With the advent of virtual reality, I'm hopeful that games will make players something of a virtual citizen of the world, experiencing parts of the Earth that they'd otherwise never get to see. So what do you think? Are game designers getting better or worse at representing cultures that are different from their own? Hash it out in the comments, and if you like what you saw, please subscribe. I'll see you next week. Last week, we looked at a visual history of Nintendo's controllers. Let's see what you had to say. Gerald Camp contrasts Nintendo's controllers to the standardized controllers of the Xbox and PlayStation, pointing out that a key advantage for the Xbox and PlayStation controllers is that players already know how to use them and designers already know how to make games for them. Hence the preponderance of titles with shooting and racing games that use the triggers. People already know that design schema, so they can jump in pretty quickly in order to play. So that first point that gamers don't know how to use Nintendo's controllers by heart, which is a common complaint of Nintendo detractors, I'd say that many of Nintendo's divergences, their dalliances in controller design, such as the Wiimote and the GameCube controller, are to make the complexities of those controllers friendlier and easier to use, but it's for people who don't identify as gamers. In the example of the Wiimote, that was made to look like a remote control because a lot of people have televisions, millions, billions of people have TVs, and those come with remote controls and people understand. So Nintendo was just trying to make that gap between playing and not playing just a little bit shorter. Air of Glee makes another very valid criticism, which is how are you going to be able to play a game with a totally ridiculous controller 10 or 20 years from now when those systems are no longer manufactured? And you already see this with games that were specifically designed for the N64 controller, like Zelda and Mario 64. I mean, I face this when I want to play the original Smash Brothers for N64. The third-party controllers are total garbage, but finding like a brand new Nintendo 64 controller is almost impossible. So one option is that you can play them through emulation, but it doesn't quite feel as natural. The Super Mario Galaxy games, for example, are some of the best around, but without the motion control and the pointer, you won't really be able to play them as they're sort of intended. As an aside, this is not a problem this is a problem that's interesting for games, but exists in other contexts as well. I'm an advisor for the Museum of Modern Art for their architecture and design program. It's something that they think about when they were taking games into the permanent collection, which is that if you take something that has a really bizarre controller, you have to think about patrons of the museum 50 years from now wanting to see that and being able to find someone who can fix your DK bongos. Not going to be an easy thing. Relo999 doesn't like my description of the Atari controller and charges me of never having used one. That's false, but my point being that yes, like the D-pad, the Atari controller is a digital controller, meaning that it has 4 buttons underneath the joystick that determine the directions you want to move in. But while the Atari stick swiveled in all directions, the D-pad made it really easy to move exactly in the cardinal directions, exact being the key word there. And many early NES games reflected that design decision. So for example, climbing up and down vines in Super Mario Bros. 2, I always found that to be a lot harder with a joystick because you wouldn't always be able to get a directly straight kind of movement up and down. So that's the point that I was making. Necrogenesis 1981 brings up the octagonal gate. That might be the most metal thing we've ever done on the show. Anyway, the octagonal gate is a plastic piece on many Nintendo controllers. If you look at a controller at the area surrounding the analog stick, you'll see that it has 8 little ridges. They're made like that intentionally, so you can move easily and precisely in a straight direction instead of a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right. Again, it works way better with Nintendo's own internally developed games rather than those made by outside parties, as Necrogenesis points out. So that means in games like Capcom versus SNK2, you run the problems because you're meant to use smooth circle-like motions for moves like fireballs that the gate unfortunately interferes with. So this is the opposite problem of Relo999 had mentioned in the previous comment.